In this video, we are going to discuss about the organs in human respiratory system. In the previous session, we had a detailed discussion about how respiration takes place in other organisms, including both the lower as well as higher organisms. So in that case, we are going to discuss today about all the organs which are involved in the breathing in human respiratory system. So starting with nostrils. Nostrils are also called as external nares. So students, there should be a pathway, there should be a door by which air can enter a body. So those openings here are referred to as nostrils. So we have two nostrils by which air enters our body. So these nostrils are openings by which the air is going to enter our body. And these openings are lined by fine hair. So why do you think, what might be the purpose of this? They act like a filtration system which is going to trap all the dust particles which are going to enter our body when air is going to enter in. So the nostrils are lined by fine hair which traps dust that enters along with the air. So this is going to be our first organ. So this opening is going to lead into which place? That is going to be our second organ, that is our nasal cavity. So nasal cavity is also called as nasal chamber. Nasal chamber. The nasal chamber itself or the cavity itself can be divided into three major regions. So let us write down that. The first region is called as vestibular chamber or vestibular region. The second region or the chamber is called as respiratory chamber. And the third chamber or the region is called as olfactory chamber. Okay. So yes, what is this vestibular chamber? Vestibular chamber is the beginning part or the first part of the nasal cavity. So the front region of this nasal chamber is called as vestibular chamber. So this is the region where we can see there's a kind of septum, a cross wall which is dividing our nasal cavity or the entire chamber into two regions. So here we can see that central septum. Yes, obviously the central septum is nothing but the cartilaginous part which is dividing our nostrils itself into the right one and the left one. So this is the part that comes under the vestibular chamber. So what is this respiratory chamber here? So respiratory chamber is nothing but the part which behaves like an air conditioner. So this behaves like an air conditioner. So why it is called as air conditioner here, right? So this is the region which is going to make the air which is coming or entering our body to be like adjusted to our body temperature. For example, what happens is sometimes if the environment where we are living gets all of a sudden very much dry, as we can see or experience in the time of winter season, the air which is entering our body is like totally dry. There is no moisture in it at all. So that is not at all suitable for the body because that air can do a lot of damage inside. So this dried air must be moistened up inside, right? And sometimes what happens is if the climate is very much cold and we are breathing inside this cold air, so that has to be warmed up inside. So all these different type of work where the air will be adjusted to our body temperature, so that takes place in the part called as the respiratory chamber. So what is going to happen in respiratory chamber? This part adjust the air according to our body temperature. Like one thing what it can do is, first point, this part can warm up the air. If the air is bit cold, then it can be making it a little bit like warmed up. Secondly, it can also moisten the air. So how these two things can be done by this respiratory chamber? So for this, the magic lies in the lining which is lining the respiratory chamber. So the respiratory chamber is lined by two important things. First one is it is lined by ciliated epithelium, and secondly it is also lined by mucous membrane. So these two things are helping us in making the air to be adjusted to our body temperature. And thirdly, we'll just go to the last slide here, the previous one. That is olfactory chamber. So the name itself tells us what is the meaning of olfactory. Is one of the senses that we have which helps us in detecting the smell. So yes, olfactory chamber is going to be our third part. Olfactory chamber. Okay. So this olfactory chamber is the last chamber or the last region of our nasal cavity, and this chamber is lined by sensory membrane. So the name itself tells us that having a lot of cells which can detect or sense the smell. So these type of cells, the sensory membrane is made up of a lot of cells which are called as receptors. So what do they receive? What do they like sense? They are going to sense smell. So it is going to sense the smell. So these receptors are having a very fixed name to it, a very specific name to it called as olfactory cells. So the conclusion can be given in this form, that is the sensory membrane is lined by a lot of olfactory cells which is going to help us in detection of smell. Okay, so this is about the nasal cavity. The next organ which we are going to discuss is pharynx. So pharynx is going to behave like a common passage for both food as well as for the air. So what is this pharynx? It is a common passage for both food and air. Even pharynx is also lined by ciliate epithelium as well as there is mucous membrane. So it is lined by ciliated epithelium and also mucous membrane. Even pharynx is also divided into three different parts called as the nasopharynx, oropharynx and laryngopharynx. So the first one is nasopharynx. The nasal cavity or the nasal chamber is going to extend forward by this name or by this region called as nasopharynx. So this region is going to carry air. Okay, first part. Second part is called as oropharynx. So the buccal cavity is going to go forward into this region called as oropharynx, which is going to carry. So this carries food. The third region is called as laryngopharynx. So this is a common point where nasopharynx as well as oropharynx is going to meet together here. So it's a both nasopharynx and oropharynx commonly meets at the region that is laryngopharynx. So from here, the route or the traveling path of both the food as well as air is going to be like very much changed. Food from here is going to go into the esophagus, whereas the air from here it has to enter into the trachea. So, but before entering into the trachea, it has to go through another organ that is larynx. So what is larynx? Larynx is also called as voice box. Okay. So larynx is made up of 9 cartilaginous pieces around it. In that, the biggest one is the thyroid cartilage. So onto this thyroid cartilage, there is another flap of cartilage which is called as epiglottis. Okay. So let us write this. So there are 9 cartilage which makes up larynx, and which is being the bigger one here. The bigger cartilage of the larynx is going to be the cartilage called as thyroid cartilage. So onto the anterior part of this thyroid cartilage, we can see another flap of cartilage called as epiglottis. So on its anterior part of what? Anterior part of this thyroid cartilage. So what we can see? We can see a flap of cartilage called as epiglottis. So what does this epiglottis do? Just a minute. Yes. So what does this epiglottis do here? That we are going to learn now. So when we take a section of larynx, somewhat it looks like this. Okay. So what these regions are called as? So these are nothing but, these are the vocal cords. So how our voice box is able to produce sound, isn't it? It's because when we are like inhaling the air and when we are exhaling, at that time, the vocal cords will start to vibrate. And this is how the voice is being produced. So here we can see a narrow part here, right? In between these vocal cords. So this narrow part right here. So this part is called as glottis. So what is going to be the work or the function of this epiglottis which we just saw in the previous slide? So this epiglottis is going to cover this glottis so that there is no any food particles which is going to enter into the larynx. By that it can be prevented its entry into the trachea. So what is the work done by epiglottis? Let us write it down. Epiglottis covers the glottis and prevents the entry of food into trachea. The point is how it is going to help us, how it is going to cover the glottis. See students, epiglottis is always like erect. Okay, so when you swallow, what happens is by swallowing, epiglottis is going to move downwards and it is going to just cover the glottis part. Let us imagine this is the glottis part and this is our epiglottis, and when you swallow, what is going to happen? It is just going to move downwards and covering the glottis, so that the food has to enter into the food pipe, not into the larynx, and hence even the trachea is also protected. So how it is going to happen here? Epiglottis moves downwards while swallowing and prevents the entry of food into larynx. So this glottis part is being protected here, and hence there is no any food particle which is going to like enter forward. So the next region is going to be trachea. So trachea is also called as windpipe. So it's a pipe which is going to be like stretched from our larynx but only till our mid of the thoracic region. So it is not going to like extend all over towards the thoracic cavity. It is only going to be extended till our middle part of the thoracic cavity. So the trachea extends till mid thoracic region. So on to this fifth thoracic vertebral column. So on to that fifth thoracic vertebrae, what happens is, from there the trachea is going to like branch into right and left primary bronchi. So on the position of what? Where we can see our fifth thoracic vertebrae, what is going to happen? Trachea is divided into right and left primary bronchi. Okay, so let us draw a diagram of this. So this is going to be our larynx part, above which we have epiglottis. Further it is going to be like continued into the trachea, and trachea is going to branch into the primary bronchi. Okay, so let us label the parts here. This is epiglottis, this is larynx, just followed by trachea. Okay, so further what happens, trachea is going to like branched into the primary bronchi. So these two things are called as what? Primary bronchi. Okay, so the next heading is going to be bronchi and bronchioles. So what is this bronchi and bronchioles? Trachea branching forward gives rise to bronchi. Bronchi is going to again branch further on, which is going to give rise to many bronchioles. So the branching goes like this. Trachea divides into bronchi. We can write it as primary bronchi. Okay, so primary bronchi is going to branch, or it is going to give rise to secondary bronchi. Secondary bronchi is going to give rise to tertiary bronchi. And finally, this tertiary bronchi is going to divide, and it is going to give rise to a lot of branching here, or networks of branching, which are called as bronchioles. So here also we can name certain things as the first beginning is called as initial bronchi or bronchioles, not bronchi, bronchioles, and the last one is going to be called as terminal bronchioles. Okay, so let us just put all these things into the form of diagram here. So like this extensively it is going to grow, and it is going to give rise to many branchings like this. So this is considered as secondary bronchi. Secondary bronchi will further give rise to tertiary bronchi, and tertiary bronchi will further form many tiny branches like this. So these branches are called as, the first one is called as the initial bronchioles, and the last one will be called as terminal bronchioles. So we'll just write it generally as bronchioles. So next is what going to be ahead of this bronchioles. All these bronchioles are going to end up into a irregularly shaped kind of bag-like structures, which are also called as vascularized bag-like structures called as alveoli. So the next part is going to be alveoli. So let us write this. Terminal bronchioles gives rise to network of irregularly walled vascularized bag-like structures, which are called as what? Alveoli. If it is in the form of a singular, so it is called as alveolus. If it's like a form of plural, then it is called as what? Alveoli. So why these things are called as vascularized? So if you remember in our first beginning of the session of this chapter, it was clearly explained what is the meaning of the word vascularized. So what is vascularized? Anything which is having the supply of blood to it or network of blood vessels to it. There's literally nothing but basic meaning is to be given here is there is supply of blood to it. So those kind of structures are called as what? Vascularized structures. So these are called as what? Alveoli. Alveoli are also called as air sacs. So this is the region where exchange of gases takes place by a process of diffusion. So where diffusion is going to take place? So it is going to take place in alveoli. Alveoli is the region where exchange of gases takes place. So how does the exchange of gases takes place here? By the process called as diffusion. So what is diffusion? Diffusion means movement of particles. Here let us consider as the movement of gas molecules from higher concentration to lower concentration. Since this major work is done in alveoli, we say or we call alveoli as, this is the functional unit of lungs. Okay. So right from the beginning of trachea, primary bronchi, secondary bronchi, tertiary bronchi, and also the initial bronchioles, all of these pipe-like structures, don't you think even they should have something like a support system to it? So who is providing this support system? So right from the beginning of trachea all the way towards initial bronchioles. They rightly said this is initial bronchioles. So concentrate here. I am not mentioning as the entire bronchioles. I am mentioning here very precisely as the initial bronchioles. So all these structures are supported by incomplete cartilaginous rings. So let us draw that in our diagrammatic part. So like this, what we can see, there are C-shaped rings or incomplete cartilaginous rings which are lining everywhere, all the way from trachea to the initial bronchioles. So these organs are externally supported by incomplete rings of cartilage. So what is the use of this, right? So these incomplete rings of cartilage is going to prevent the collapsing of these organs. So it is going to do what? It prevents the trachea and other regions from collapsing. Alright students, so right from the trachea, primary bronchi, secondary bronchi, tertiary bronchi and all these bronchioles and alveoli, all these things will comprise lungs. So the next organ which we are going to learn is about lungs.